Machine.
Hi, it's Claire here, and welcome to Hot Pod Time Machine. This is the podcast where we discuss a decision from our past that changed our future. And I'm very happy to welcome on this episode it's the wonderful Chris Ryall. Hello, Chris.
Uh,
How are you
hey,
doing?
Claire. Great to see you.
Good to see
Good.
you
Thank you.
too. Thank you for joining me on Hot Pod Time Machine. Now, I always ask this as a very first question for everyone on this podcast. When I asked you to be on the podcast, you knew it was about a decision from your past that changed your future. What kind of decisions went through your brain? Don't tell me what you're going to talk about just yet, because we make decisions all the time, every day. So, what was going through your mind?
Well, it's funny because there was one that kind of looms larger for me more than anything else. So when you first mentioned that as a topic, like I almost knew without question what my answer was going to be. Like you say, there are lots of little things along the way that have determined various paths and trails you go down, but this one that stood out to me was kind of the one that was probably the biggest catalyst for change in my life beyond like the personal stuff, getting married or having a child, that kind of thing. Like this was the one that sort of I was very clearly staring down two separate paths and had to make a decision, and either one was going to change the direction from there going forward. So yeah, I knew very clearly what I wanted to talk about.
Oh, okay. You're possibly the first person out of I don't know how many, almost 40 episodes that has said, no, I know exactly what I was going to choose. Everyone else is like, oh, it took me a while. Okay, then, Chris. So, what was the decision that you want to talk about?
Well, it's funny because now that you say that, like maybe that means I haven't made enough other big decisions in my
No.
life that so this one stands out. But so this was almost 20 years ago now. I was working in Los Angeles, living in LA, and I was a corporate speechwriter. So to back up a little, like I'd always been a comic book nerd, as you can see, sort of how I still surround myself with the tools of what became my trade. And so I always wanted to be a writer, and it was hard to find a way into writing fiction, because it's tough to break in, it's tough to make a living doing those things. So I was doing advertising copy, writing brochures, billboard ads, stuff that I didn't find very gratifying. That moved into corporate speech writing. Um, and I found all of it sort of unsatisfying. And so to give myself a more satisfying something to hold on to, I also started writing comic book reviews online, um, just as a way to kind of have a foothold just adjacent to the industry, um, and to write about stuff that I cared more about, that I was more passionate about. And so in the midst of writing these comic book reviews and columns and pieces and think pieces, that kind of thing, I got to know filmmaker Kevin Smith, um, who's now, primarily a podcaster, still making movies and directing TV shows. But at the time, he was the guy that had done Clerks and some spin-offs. He sort of took exception to one of my reviews of one of his comics, and over a number of months of us going back and forth about things and him telling me why my opinion was wrong, and us kind of having this, it was like this charmingly contentious online relationship that I just think the world has gotten too hectic and busy and sort of just too much online preponderance to be able to even do now. Um, it started getting kind of friendly, and he started just talking to me about other things. And it eventually came about that he offered me a job running a website for him, which was he had this website in one of his movies called Movie Poop Shoot. By the way, this is backstory, but it all is leading up to this big decision.
Sure.
Um, so he had this website in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back called Movie Poop Shoot that was like his kind of pointed parody of Ain't It Cool News and kind of the early movie review sites on the internet. And so it was very much a place where, like in his film, fans just shit talked movies and that kind of thing. And so he said, "Well, I've got this name, but I want to make it a legit web portal. I want it to be a place where it's sort of one-stop shopping for movie news, comic news, TV news, everything that I like to see from all these different sites aggregated in one place, and I'd like you to run it for me." I mean, I had no experience doing that kind of thing. And so he goes, "Could you do that?" And I go, "Well, yes, of course, Kevin Smith." Um, and then I went to my car and kind of had this little panic attack thinking, I don't know how to do this. But, it's the kind of thing I don't know, you jump in, you try to figure these things out. And so, as much as the name of the website kind of was an anchor against legitimacy, it was hard to tell like film publicists, like, I'd like to talk to your client. I represent movie poop shoots, and they go, what the hell kind of website is this? But like, we made it a legitimate thing, and so along the way, like, I ran that for a couple years, and through that site, I got to know some comic book writers. Foremost among them was a guy named Steve Niles, who was at the time writing a lot of horror comics. He wrote a book called 30 Days a Night at this little publisher in San Diego called IDW Publishing. And so I bought the comic at the time, and I didn't know anything about the company. But so Kevin, let me see if I get the tracks on this in the right order. Kevin at the time was about to open a second comic store. He had one in New Jersey where he was from, but he'd recently relocated to Los Angeles. He was opening a second store in Westwood Village, where I lived right nearby. I was living in Brentwood at the time, which is just adjacent to Westwood. And he said, I'm opening this comic shop. I'd like you to come run it for me. So my plan at the time, like in my head, was like, all right, I could run the comic store, but also keep this website going for him on the side. Um, and at the exact same time, Steve Niles introduced me to IDW, who had just lost their first editor in chief. They'd only been a publisher about a year and a half. And so I talked to them, and they said, we want you to come be the editor in chief of IDW. And so, literally in the same week, I got offered the job of opening and running a comic book store in Brentwood, or I'm sorry, in Westwood, or moving my whole life down to San Diego and working for this little comic publisher who I didn't really know anything about, but I would be on the inside. I would be the editor in chief. I'd be able to write comics. I'd be able to do all the things that as a kid I always wanted to do. And so it was like, do I stay in LA where kind of the entertainment business is?
Yeah.
And do I keep working for Kevin, who I trust and who Kevin was an important figure, is an important figure in that town. And so I was thinking, like, this is a great opportunity. I could run a comic book store where I can then talk up comics to all the people that also love comics like I do, and sort of like felt like my whole life had kind of read to a point where I could do those things. Or I could like move out of the city, and I'd never moved anywhere. I mean, I was from Orange County, so I moved about 45 minutes, was about the largest move I'd had in my life at that time. But now I'd be moving. It sounds grandiose, but it's really only 2 hours down the freeway.
Oh,
But
come
still, it
on,
felt at the
Chris.
time like a yeah, I know, but it felt like a big move for me
Yeah.
anyway, because I was like in this little sheltered world. And
Yeah.
so then I had to decide, do I want to run a comic store, keep running this website that was going along really well, or do I just pack it all into a car and head down the freeway and try to
So
make comics?
let me stop you there, because this is a very
Yeah,
pivotal moment in your story, and it's the fork in the road moment, which when we look back on those moments, we feel that they're very pertinent. But did you feel at the time that it was pertinent, where you're like, this is the fork in the road, this is the thing that it's like a sliding doors moment? Is that how you felt?
I did. And I mean, I didn't really think about other decisions in my life in that way, but this one felt like it had added weight, because it was like I felt like I need to start getting a little bit more serious about what I'm doing with my life and career. Um, and on the one hand, I've got this situation that is familiar and comfortable in a town where all my friends are, and a town that I'm familiar and comfortable with, and all of those things. Or I just take a flyer, and without having all these big responsibilities that I sort of hold people back from decisions, house, family, kids, all those things, I could just give it a shot, and try this complete unknown situation. And the thing that helped it was like I'd always wanted to live in San Diego. Like when I would come down to Comic Con, I'd be like, my God, the city's beautiful. Like it's by the beach. Like if I ever get a chance to move here, like I'm definitely going to take it. And then I got a chance to move there. I was like, well, shit, I don't know if I actually want to like
It's the fear.
back up that talk. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
because it becomes real. It's like dreams, like fantasy, the fantasy realm, and whatever is fantasy in your head feels comfortable, and it's always fluffy and warm and hazy and soft focused, right? But as soon as you make it reality, you feel a bit sick, and you go, oh no, I don't like it. Is that how you felt about that? Then it was like, oh god, I don't like this. Oh god.
Yeah, because not only are you leaving behind everything and everyone and again, it's not that far, but it still is going to affect your day to day. Like you can't just go to a friend's house and hang out and all of that stuff. And I mean, I'm a comic book guy and a writer and reader and all of those things. So I've got that introverted side where like I don't just get out there easily and make new friends easily, especially once you become an adult. Like it just becomes harder to do that kind of thing, or even you don't even have the motivation to do it because you're like, I don't know, like it's easier to just sit in my little bubble, And so
It's more about the
I was like, well, do I?
motivation, I'm just tired a lot,
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
it's
yeah.
tired.
Um, and so yeah, there was a lot of that. There was also a lot of like the other thing that you do when you try to have these creative pursuits is like it's real easy to convince yourself that you would be good at it and be able to succeed at it if only you did it. But like now I actually had to do it. I had to go do a thing and succeed at it and back up sort of the thoughts that are in your head of like, well, yeah, I could probably do that. Now I actually had to do that. And so all of those things were just like, Jesus, I don't know. Like I don't know anything about this town, where to live, how to do this job, all of those things. And so yeah, it really felt weighty at the time. Not that I couldn't go back up the freeway and try to get another job or something if it failed, but at the time it felt like a really big coin toss.
Did you decide then to toss that coin one way or the other? Like, was it the fear? So sometimes I think fear is quite I don't know, attractive. I don't know. It's not attractive for everybody. Now, I'm talking from my perspective, and I don't know about yours, which is this is the question I'm kind of asking you, I guess. I know a lot of people who are so scared they won't move. They don't do the scary thing and they stay in one town in one place, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know, sometimes I like to scratch the itch a little bit and I go,
Hmm.
I don't know if I can do these things, but let's just try it anyway. Is that what made you decide to just do the scary thing?
Yeah, because even when you do it on a smaller scale, like I did little bits of not even theater, but like elementary school plays. And again, I was a real shy kid, but like then you get up there and people respond, you're like, it kind of gives you a dopamine hit, and you're like, and I don't know, or you get up and do public speaking. Like I've done bits of public speaking, I've taught courses here and there, I've given lectures and seminars and all these kind of things that initially, when you're backstage, you're about to go on, you're just like have that like anxious moment, but it's also it feels real scary, but also feels good. And then once you pull it off, you're like, all right, well, I can do that. So I can do this thing. And if I can do that thing, maybe I can do this next thing. And so, yeah, you're right. It gets real easy to not do stuff and just sort of stay comfortable. But there is something really appealing and rewarding about stepping outside of your comfort, even if it doesn't always go well, because not everything always goes well. Um, but even that you can learn from or sort of have fun with or becomes a good story later on.
Yeah, and like I'm sure now. How long have you been in San Diego for?
Almost 20 years, so like 19 years now.
Yeah, so like obviously now you've built a whole life in San Diego. Like, can you imagine going back the way now, or do you envisage yourself just living there forever? Or is there another decision that you have to make? Maybe it takes you further afield, do you think?
Yeah, and the good thing is like having done this big move when it felt so hard to do at the time, I think now if I move elsewhere, it doesn't seem as daunting for some reason. The thing that seems daunting now is just like the physical move as you're experiencing, like
Yeah.
packing up all your shit, and books are real heavy and records are real heavy and all that stuff. But like the idea of a new setting now is appealing to me because I've gotten to do lots of things and see lots of places and meet lots of interesting people all over the world. And so now that I've like gotten out of that initial little shell or bubble that I was in when I was young, like I love the idea of going elsewhere and being different places and all of that. And so it doesn't feel as weighty to me now. And so I've already been kicking around other like places to like, are there other countries if 2024 goes terribly here, like
Yeah.
maybe it's not a bad idea to have other plans in mind, like just stuff like that. That I don't know, it doesn't feel as scary now because I did it once and it all went okay.
I feel like, with these podcasts, what you're saying is very common to what other folks have said when they've, regardless of introversion and extroversion, where they have pushed themselves beyond their barriers a little bit for the better, and it could be a move to another country. Usually it's the move to the other country for a lot of people, changing jobs completely, that kind of thing. But I feel like we are not encouraged, I think, from a young age to break the mold. I don't know about you, but when I was at school, doing art or music or anything weird or wanting to go further afield was almost discouraged a little bit by parents and also
Mm.
by people within the school system. Did you feel that as well, or do you think it's just a personality thing whether you break the mold or not?
I definitely felt that, and I don't know if it's because like a generation of parents before were so, I don't know. You just put your head down. You did your job for 30 years, and you're retired. And you didn't take chances because they either had less options or I don't know what it was. Whatever post-war mentality kind of drilled into them, that you go to a thing, you do a thing, and you stay with the thing. And so, like, I always wanted to be a writer. I want to take writing classes in college. I wanted to be a communications major, and all of the things along with that, like trying to sort of develop a voice and make art. And my dad was a police officer for his whole career, and so he was very matter of fact, very no nonsense, very much like, no, 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 you don't do these flights of fancy. You're a business major. You just do this, and you get a job, and then you shut the fuck up and just do your thing, and be happy with that. And for a while, I went along with that, which I don't know. I think just because you kind of want to please your parents, but then you realize like pleasing yourself is far more important than sort of living up to some like preconceived or dated or I don't know, a notion that suits them but doesn't suit you. And so I started like sort of sneaking around and taking writing classes on the side, or, I would fulfill the bits of my major and then I would take extra classes just so I could kind of get a secret foothold in this world that I wanted. But up to and including the fact that I was doing corporate speech writing and I found it so tedious. And so on the side, I was writing comics and comic related things, but I couldn't commit because I just felt like I'd be disappointing my parents if I did, until I realized, well, I'm going to disappoint them a lot more if I end up just being unhappy and doing something that I don't want to be doing. And or if it does disappoint them, like that's a thing they're going to have to deal with themselves. And so, yeah, you got to worry about your own happiness, I think, before trying to please whatever they want you to be doing.
It's really heartening to hear you talk about writing in that way. That's clearly a passion of yours, and when somebody external tries to squash that passion, it's almost like it was trying to get out no matter what, like a little animal inside you kind of thing. And I always think that about creativity. I think a lot of people, when they see weirdness or creativity or something, and it's almost like I don't know, like my experience is people try to squash that and go, no, you can't do that, you can't do art, you can't do music, you can't write, that's not a real job. Well, they are real jobs actually, because there are people doing them. So I don't know
Yeah, yeah.
what's a real job. If we were only doctors, vets, people in shops or whatever, then the world would be a very bland place. The reason why great music exists is because weirdos exist. The reason why great art exists or writing is because people are pushing boundaries all the time. I don't understand why people are scared and fear creativity. Do you think that they do, or they just don't understand it? Is it fear or a misunderstanding, would you say?
I think it's probably both of those things, but also some people just aren't able to allow their voice to come out, and so I almost I don't want to say it's jealousy, but like my dad never indulged anything he enjoyed, and I think he begrudged people that did because then it felt like you weren't a serious person or you weren't I don't know doing what you were supposed to do for whatever form of responsibility he felt like people had. And I think you have a responsibility to yourself to sort of indulge the things that inspire you and sort of make you feel better about your day. And I mean, not that everybody needs to like have a or pursue a career in the arts, but like if you go home and you just, I don't know, you build Legos or you draw pictures or you write stuff that's just for you or whatever it is that kind of lets you, I don't know, bring sort of your inner voice out to whatever degree, I think is a very important pursuit. I also think they think, well, there's no money in art, or it's too up and down, and so we want you to have a thing that gives you stability, partly so you're not coming to us and asking for money or whatever. Um, but also, I think just yeah, I think a lot of people just don't understand it. They don't think of it as a real thing, and so that's why it's good when you can turn it into a real thing because then you can go, well, look, see, this is a legitimate job.
And it's lovely. Like all,
Yeah,
my friends all work as writers, comedians, artists, whatever. We all talk about work like it's not work, and we're very
yeah,
fortunate
yeah.
to be able to do that. Of course, sometimes it feels like work, there's things that we have to do sometimes that are worky,
Mm.
but I love meeting weird people and creative people, and like yourself, we met at Comic Con, and like immediately all of us I think got very drunk and just started talking, like, and it was lovely, and I
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that kind of like it's real. It's just lovely that we can call this work, and I feel sad for those who I've got friends who are miserable, and they earn a lot more than me, and they've got really great jobs, but they're so miserable, and they're looking to get out. They want to get fired, they want to get out,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's really quite depressing. I mean, what would you be doing though if the writing didn't kick off for you? Because clearly that was right really inside you.
Yeah.
Is there a second or a third thing you would have like gone for, do you think?
I don't know, probably been some middle manager at some big company
No.
where like I didn't make a decision, because middle management feels all about like just trying to keep your job. And I don't know. I mean, I like to think maybe something more important, but I was kind of bouncing around, sort of just didn't know exactly what I wanted to be doing. So again, I would like get close to a thing, but kind of pull back. So I was like writing advertising copy, which I also didn't really take to. I took a job purely for money twice, and both times it ended up going terribly, And one was with Dick Clark, who was big entertainment figure in LA at the time, like for like 50 years. Um, but the drive was terrible, the work was terrible, and the money was good, and the money didn't matter at all because my life was just in shambles. Like it was just so miserable. And so I've tried really hard to focus on what's going to make me happy because like we all have friends who you get to be 35 or whatever 40 and people go, well, it's too late for me to change jobs. I'm like, it's never too late because like you're still going to work for what 20, 30 more years. Like you really want to be unhappy for a couple more decades because you think it's too like it's never too late to figure out a thing that's going to make you happy or give you more creative fulfillment.
And you know what? I was thinking that recently in the last couple of years. Even I was thinking that I wanted to pivot a little bit to performance, do more comedy, that kind of thing, write stuff for myself and write things. And even my brain went, am I too old for this though? Was it too old to pivot? Why do we think like that though? Because we're not old. We're not like in our 90s. Then it's too old.
No, but I mean, it is a town that sort of makes you feel that way at times. But there's this comedian named Dean Del Rey who was he's now a big podcaster too, but he was like a music guy for I don't know until he was like in his late 40s, just playing in like metal bands, didn't really accomplish a whole lot. It never quite broke through. Decided he wanted to be a comedian again in his late 40s, and now he was opening for Bill Burr. Like he's been sort of showing that it doesn't matter like when you get into a thing. If you believe in the thing and you're passionate about it and you sort of really give your all to it, like you can make a go of it and you can certainly be more fulfilled than you were and all of that. And so I think that's been an important thing for me too, because I left so I took the IDW job, which is probably no spoiler at this point.
Sorry we meandered,
And
but
so I
yes, of
was
course.
yeah, yeah. So I was there like 17 years and I left there during the pandemic, which was a real scary time to not have stability. Um, and so since then, I've kind of flirted with, well, do I go back and take another job, or do I just try to stay on the freelance end of things where I can cast all about and do all kinds of different things? And so since then, I sold a TV show, I've sold a couple of books, I started an imprint at Image. Like I've been doing a lot of different things that are a lot more scramble, much harder work, much less pay, but also vastly more rewarding. And so again, it's just trying to figure out like what's the path to happiness at whatever point you are in your life.
Seems to For you it seems to be working. Like you're just kind of going, I'll do what makes me happiest. And this is a very good example. Of course, there probably have been bumps along the way and times where you've gone, oh my God, because you're human. Human life isn't always linear and it's not always one way or the other.
Yeah.
But it seems to be whenever you're taking risks, it's sort of, would you agree that the risks sort of have paid off for you, I guess, essentially?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if like you say, like it ebbs and flows. I've had to sort of really adjust to the tenor of being a freelancer after not having to wonder when or how I'm getting paid, for a number of years. And so it's funny, like I'll sort of complain about typical freelancer stuff now to all these freelancer friends of mine, and they'll be like, "Yeah, no shit, like that's what we've been experiencing forever." And so, welcome to the
Welcome to
other
our
side,
world.
Yeah, but the gratifying part of it is you can choose who you want to work with, and you can choose not to be surrounded by a-holes or people that kind of sort of have a negative effect on your psyche, which a lot of times when you work for other people, you can run into those kind of people. And so it is that trade-off, and it's like, what's going to get me to my happiest place, and that is a place where I can sort of feel creatively fulfilled without all of that extra shit in my head kind of weighing me down. And so, yeah, in that way, it's been completely gratifying.
It's that kind of thing that you described there of being able to pivot and work with whoever you want. That is, like, an immense strength and power, actually. And sometimes there have been times even this year since starting the podcast. At the beginning of the year, I had a clear idea of what I was doing for the year, and now I'm like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. It's like within, I guess, a roughly 40 weeks of doing this podcast, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do this, and this. I want to do something else. And that is a wonderful thing. It's a very scary thing, but it's also a wonderful thing. Like, I don't think that life should be linear, and working within somebody else's structure can give safety. But I've always felt like, I don't know about you, because you had the proper job, you knew your wages were coming from and things. So I'm interested to know, for me personally, when I have structure, I feel like the cage walls are coming down and I get really agitated. But you've lived both lives now, would you go back to structure? Is that how you feel, or are you kind of like easy Ozy?
Well, it's funny because I'm always wary of giving an answer that in a year from now, when I'm like taking a corporate job somewhere, you're like, "Ah, you hypocrite." But I like to think that like being walled into a point starts to become, it's the thing they talk about, like the golden parachutes, or even if it's not golden, like it's still the thing, or golden handcuffs, whatever the expression is. The thing that, like, all right, I could go try all these other things, but also it's, again, like living in LA and not choosing to move to San Diego was like the comfortable, easy thing. And I don't know, you reach a point where it's like it's not fun or gratifying finding the easy, comfortable way. And so, especially because, like, working in comics, I've met the best and most creative and most just inspiring people that I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like, just such an amazing field of people that are making stuff. And so then you're like, well, if all of them are out there really just not struggling, but like dealing with day to day uncertainty and still managing to make all this amazing art, like I owe it to myself to do the same, and not just try to find the easy path again. And again, like I don't know, you feel like you make so many concessions when you work for uh, I guess I'll say that, like, a lot of the money comes from people that aren't people that you would choose to surround yourself with if they weren't supplying the money. And so I try not to make those decisions and surround myself or be beholden to those kinds of people again, is a very important thing, because it also means now, like, for stand-ups or for you or for all of the people that are making stuff, like, you're reliant on yourself. And so you can't just sit back and go, well, I'm getting paid whether I do my job well this week or not. You go, I got to really work hard and sort of justify what I'm doing, because I'm the only one that is kind of the determiner of my own fate here.
Absolutely. It feels like just kind of like turning up, going, yeah, phoning it in is not, for me, doesn't feel like a good feeling when you're in any job. You're just going, yeah, whatever, and just whatever. Like, it feels better to have a bit of the struggle, a bit of the edge. So that when you
Yeah.
get to the winning point, you're like, oh, that feels so good. Like it feels amazing. Like, and you feel that you could enjoy your success a little bit more. But I wanted to ask because you said that you had written ad copy and corporate copy before. So tell me, Chris, give us some of your best ad copy tips from what you know now.
All right. Well, this one isn't as much related to the copy itself as the schedule that you get put on for these things. So I was working at this ad agency, and I started there as a the other side of it. So I was like the account person. I was like, because I didn't know how to get into the agency world because I came from like the corporate world. When I was in college, I ended up with this corporate internship that just kind of stayed. And so I'm like, I want to work in an ad agency, but I want to be a copywriter. And there was no way to just start as that without any kind of portfolio. So I came in on the other side of things, and I would watch like the creative department. We would give schedules of like, all right, you have 6 weeks to come up with 3 headlines for billboards. And they're like 3 words each. So it's you can't really put a time limit on it, but I mean it's a couple hours of work. And they would take 6 weeks, and I'd see them, they'd be out golfing or drinking all day and stuff like that. And I'm like, my God, like they have such easy schedules. And so what I learned was when I got to the creative end of things was don't turn stuff around right away. Because once you do, then you sort of establish a pattern of, well, this stuff's not that complicated. I can turn around and give you a lot of different options on this copy in a couple days instead of the 6 weeks that you gave me. Like, no, 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 take the time and let them think that it's all germinating in your head for weeks on end and stuff like that. Which I also learned again when I sold this TV show and we were writing the pilot, and we get notes back from the studio, and like my first inclination was like to be the good soldier and like make the changes overnight, and here they are back, like, oh please, can we have our show now? And the producer was like, no, don't do that. Like, let's take a couple weeks, let it sit, then we'll talk about it, and then you guys can take a crack at it. But if you start establishing a pattern of turning stuff around immediately, like they'll always expect that from you, and sometimes it's harder than others. And so I guess that was the thing I initially learned in the ad world was you don't have to turn stuff around right away. Like they're not going to move on without you, um, just because you didn't come back to them overnight. Like work at a manageable pace and sort of let it germinate in your head for a bit.
Make them think that you're really working. Like really.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So make them
Because if they
think,
think it's not work, yeah,
yeah, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, Chris is great. Like he's just gonna turn that in like tomorrow. That is a really good tip. So don't, because
yeah.
my feeling would be get the work done in the fastest possible way, in the most efficient possible way. Get my
Mm.
paycheck, leave it behind. But perhaps that's not the best way. Yeah, just let it percolate a little bit. That's probably best. But I don't know if you're a
And
fast
I mean,
worker
it's
with
kind of
that.
yeah. I think I always am. And maybe that's to the detriment of the work. Like maybe it's better if you let it sit for a while. Like novelists will say, when you do a first pass at a book, then put it in a drawer, let it sit for 2, 3 weeks. Then when you come back to it to do rewrites, like you're more of an editor where you're reading something that's more fresh in your mind, or you're reading it fresh. It's not like it's so like you just finished one draft and you start on the second draft. So you've got time to get some distance from it. And I think the same thing with writing copy, writing anything, like to not, I don't know. I think turn stuff in early, but just early, not early, early. So you're still ahead of the deadline, but you're not so ahead of the deadline that they think they can just push you to always have really fast turnarounds.
And it's interesting that about leaving, the writing sometimes, because there's times where I'll write a thing, like a little 5 minute set, and I think it's perfect. And then like 3 weeks later, I'm like, I don't understand any of this. Do you get that as well? Where
Yeah,
you're like, what the hell am I writing here? And I want to scrap it all. Do you get that often?
totally. Yeah. In fact, so this is I've never done it. And speaking of fear that like you don't always see through, like I decided at one point I wanted to try like an open mic night. And so I was gonna do like just a set based on comic books. It was kind of before comic book culture had sort of gotten too big. And so I started writing this whole set about, I don't know, comic related stuff. But some of it was just notes, and I looked back at it a couple months later and was like, I have no idea where I was going with this. That's not funny. Like, what do you even? And so I just kind of scrapped the whole thing. The closest I got to it was I did a panel one time, and you try to make panels at comic conventions something more interesting, and so I did it like as a talk show. So I was like going to come out and be like a late night talk show host. So I came out and I started with the monologue, and I had somebody from the office, like we did cue cards, and they held up big cue cards, and I would like read my set off of that, and I had a guest come up at a time and interview them, and I had a musical interlude. I had this whole thing. And so that was like the closest I came to trying to do any kind of stand up. But even then, I had the crutch of reading off the cue cards, which was partly for a comedic effect, like Saturday Night Live,
Yeah.
but partly because I'm like, I don't know how to memorize a set and like do it convincingly. So yeah, like
It's a lot of
yeah,
improv. I think I
yeah,
tend to
yeah.
just kind of fly by the seat of my pants a lot. Although when I've been doing television and things like that, and you have to memorize, is when I have to memorize dates and facts and figures. I'm like, okay, I can't. My brain's a bit kind of like numbers. Don't like that. But if it's just riffing, oh, you can, it's fine. You can just riff all day and just like kind of like go with it. I think that panels at Comic Cons are always better when you kind of go off script a little bit. You have to have a little bit of structure. Depends on the guest, I guess, but I quite like just talking, and you just have a chat instead of, oh, so tell me about this and when this happened, and just nobody wants to hear that. I don't know how you feel on the other side when you're being interviewed. Do you feel it like, do you
No,
get bored?
yeah, I mean, completely the same thing where I'm like, I'll have sort of a sketch of what I want to talk about, but I never practice it. I never like, I don't know, have a script or anything like that. And so at one point we hired somebody who worked at one of the big publishers. And we were about to do a panel, and I remember they go, "I well, where are my talking points?" And I'm like, "Talking points? Like we're just going to go up there and have a dialogue and talk about the books we're doing." And they go, "Well, no, no. Where's like what can I say? What can I not say?" And I'm like, "Say stuff that makes people want to read the books, and don't say stuff that makes them not want to read the books." And just like didn't understand because they'd come from such a place of like a corporate publisher that kind of dictated like here's what you can and can't say and here's how to say it and all that. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, let's just get up there and talk, which I think is a thing that podcasts have made so apparent. Like, there's so much more compelling when it is just a dialogue,
Yeah.
and that's why I think late night talk show hosts are probably having a harder time with talking to actors and stuff because it's so not only is it so short and there's not really time to get a community or a connection, but it's also so scripted or planned out. Whereas a podcast is like, no, it's just a free form dialogue. We don't need big introduction. We can just roll tape or roll audio and you just start talking and let's. I don't know. It's so much more interesting that way.
Here's the thing, like, and you make a good point about the late night talk show hosts and things. There was a place for them at one point and a place in time, but I think people like real, people like
Yeah.
reality as well, and I think we like the burps and the farts and the faults and the whatever. We like all. Not that I'm burping and farting on this podcast. If people
I
want
was
me
wondering why
to,
you kept hitting mute, but
will you just hear me go?
yeah,
Will you see me go like this?
yeah,
But I just feel like it's much nicer to just see all of the sort of imperfections. And those imperfections aren't imperfections, they're just what make us human. And I grew up in that, you probably similar. I grew up in that time of like, hey everyone, blah 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 blah, and it was all like this on television, and that's why TV's failing a little bit. I
yeah,
do believe
yeah.
that. But there's also something else that I think that's happening now amongst. I don't want to sound like an old fogey, but amongst the younger generation or an online sort of the online contingency, shall we say, where there's another type of fakeness, where everyone looks like a filter and everything is the same sort of content. So it's almost like creativity eats itself, or I don't know, like it's almost. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it kind of feels like just about everything, like, starts out in a pure place and ends up in a place that is completely counter to what the people had in mind when they first started it. It's kinda like social media, it's there was a writer named Cory Doctorow who sort of wrote about what he called the shitification of the internet, and so you'll get a site. Let's just pick a random example, like Twitter, where it's a thing that becomes a thing that is very viable, and then I don't know, somebody from outside decides they want to come in and sort of doesn't understand what made it so viable, and then changes it to a degree that it loses all its viability, and that's kind of and so then it sits in the death throes for a while where we all keep hoping it can return to form. But I mean, ultimately, those things die and something else takes their place because we just can't stop messing with the thing. And so I don't know, like you say, I love the humanity of podcasts, or even when you can see the celebrities that you think are like they're on top of the world. They did a $10 million movie. They did this. They did that. Um, but then you listen to them on a podcast. You're like, they got insecurities. They have problems. They have health things. They have family stuff. They have sort of all the struggles that people have that you used to kind of not think of them as having because you would only see them in 2 minute segments on talk shows where everything is great and they're selling their big movie and it's like life is wonderful. And I think the fact that they can be more humanized by an actual dialogue sort of lets people know that the divide isn't as great, and you might think their life is perfect and your life is shitty because you're not as entitled or what have you that they are. But no, like it's not that different. Like everybody sort of goes through a lot of ups and downs in life, and certainly people trying to make stuff, like even on a grander scale, like it's I don't know. I find it relatable and humanizing and sort of inspiring just to know that everybody at all levels has the same kind of struggles.
We do. The most comments and the best comments I ever got on my DMs or on Instagram and things, and even after an event was when I did the Loki panel. It was Tom Hiddleston and some of the cast of Loki, and it was huge. It was 5,000 people there. So it was a very big audience, and I asked if he and they all got imposter syndrome, and he was like, and immediately
Hmm.
that was the most human I saw him because he's obviously it's all Disney, right? So they're all very like
Yeah.
careful about what they say, and I had to be very careful about what I was asking. The PRs were all like this, and he went, "Oh my god, yeah." Like, and all of a sudden, he like everything broke down, and each one of them really enjoyed asking that question. And there was a few young kids that came up to me afterwards and went, "Thank you for asking that because I thought it was just me." And it's like, of course, it's not just you, my friends. Like,
Yeah.
even the most successful person will turn around and go, "Am I meant to be here?" Like we're human, so I don't know
Well,
why there's a sheen.
yeah, and I think that's a really important thing for people that are trying to like enter the arts or just at whatever level, keep in mind because it's so easy to like I'll look at some of the old books like this that I loved and be like, God damn, Alan Moore is the greatest comic writer who's ever lived. Like people are doing things that I'll never be able to do because my mind doesn't work like that. And like, why do I bother? This is terrible. Nobody needs what I'm trying to do. And when they have Alan Moore and they have all these people that are up on the mountaintop, and then you go, well, no, but whatever Alan Moore and all of these other great writers can do, like they still do things as they do it, and I do things the way I would do it. And so you hopefully there is a place for like you want to develop your own distinctive voice and sort of not let the fact that there's all these luminaries that are maybe better at it than you think you'll ever be get in your way because then nobody would try to make anything because there's always people that are sort of on the various mountaintops. And so you got to compartmentalize and shut all of that out and just go, no, I want to try to be the best version of what I can be and sort of develop my voice in a way that's going to be compelling. And so I think, yeah, everybody feels that. Like everybody gets into a thing because they're a fan of somebody that came before. And so it's easy to think that like, well, they were better, they were first, they were this and that. And so why should I try? And like, thank God we sort of shut those voices out to whatever degree we can, because otherwise people would keep trying to make stuff. And I think making stuff's real important.
Right? There's only one you, whoever that is listening
Yeah.
out there. There's only one of you, and that is it. So keep making things. Otherwise, my God, we're just gonna be little grey drones, doing our 9 to 5s, and no great music, art, or writing will ever happen. So we need to keep remembering that. But Chris, it has been wonderful chatting to you. It's been so lovely. Thank you very much for joining Hot Pod Time Machine. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, very, very smart conversation. Very inspiring too. Thank you, Claire.
We should try and do a live version at a Comic Con at some point, for sure.
Oh, I'd love that. I'd love that. Absolutely.
Should definitely do that. For those who are watching on YouTube, please subscribe and leave a comment, do all that stuff. If you're listening along on Spotify or wherever else, please do the same thing. Please subscribe. My name is Claire. This has been Chris. This is Hot Pod Time Machine, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.
Hot Pod Time Machine.